I was discussing religion with a group of people once when one of them asked me what I had against God. And the answer hit me like a ton of bricks. I have nothing against God. I have everything against people who claim to speak for God. The foundations of religions that claim to speak for God are built on nothing more than lies, falsehoods, myths, legends, fairy tales, or whatever else you want to call them. Contrary to popular belief, religions have nothing to do with God. All religions come from the minds of men, not God. Anyone who believes in any religion puts his faith in men, not God. If you're a Jew, you don't have faith in God, but in Moses and the men who wrote, interpreted, translated, and compiled the Old Testament. If you're a Christian, you don't have faith in God, but in Jesus and the men who wrote, interpreted, translated, and compiled the New Testament. If you're a Muslim, you don't have faith in Allah, but in Muhammad and the men who wrote, interpreted, etc. If you believe in any religion, your faith has been placed in the man or men that founded that particular religion, not God. You may believe in a God, but your faith has been placed in men. To put it even more bluntly, the one thing that all religious believers have in common is their complete, absolute, and unadulterated faith in the ideas of men, not God. They may believe in God, but their faith has been placed in men. And I don't mean this just in general. I mean it across the board. For example, the New Testament wasn't even canonized until the 4th century, and there were many different books about Jesus in circulation at the time that men, not God, decided would be put in the Bible. As a matter of fact, we don't even know who wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The early church simply attributed those names to those books decades after the fact. We also know that many of Paul's writings weren't even written by Paul, but by men who came after Paul, who simply attributed their books to Paul. This was done all the time in the ancient world, and these examples are just the beginning. My point being that all religious ideas come from the minds of human beings, not God. And when you put your faith in them, you're putting your faith in men, not God. In a way, this is one thing that's always bothered me about the term secular humanism. Secular humanism is defined as any system of thought based on the interests and ideas of men and having to relate only to the physical world. But in reality, all systems of thought, philosophical or religious, are based on the interests and ideas of men and to the physical world. Just because theists want you to believe what they preach comes from God doesn't make it so. One is said to be God-based, while the other is said to be man-based. But in reality, both are man-based. Anyone who has taken the time to study the world's major religions objectively can see the inconsistencies, discrepancies, falsehoods, and contradictions throughout their sacred texts. If God had a hand in writing these books, he sure isn't a God of omniscience. And don't you find it amazing how fundamentalist believers of one religion can point out all the irrational, illogical inconsistencies, contradictions, and falsehoods in other religions, but just can't seem to bring themselves to be able to identify the irrational, illogical inconsistencies, contradictions, and falsehoods in their own religion? They're the absolute worst at selecting the selective use of reason, logic, and common sense. Getting back to the concept of secular humanism, the term secular is used as a way to separate the so-called worldly from the so-called divine. But in reality, no such separation exists. Every single thought, word, or action ever attributed to God came from the fallible mind of a human, not from the infallible mind of a God. This is why all humans are humanists. When a religionist says secular humanists put their faith in men while he puts his faith in God, he's simply fooling himself. Fact is, the secular humanist, if he's rational, is putting his trust in men, while the religionist is putting his faith in men. But worst of all, the religionist is not only putting his faith in men, he's putting his faith in ignorant men who lived hundreds or even thousands of years ago. Any person who puts their faith in one of the world's religions has put their faith in the men who wrote, compiled, translated, etc., the sacred book they believe in, not God. And this is easily proven because every single one of their premises come from that book. And it can be shown that many of those texts have actually changed over time, such as the King James when King James added the story in John about Jesus teaching, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. This story was circulated as early as the 10th century, but it wasn't canonized in John until the King James Version of the Bible came out. It's also a fact that the last 12 verses of Mark were added later as well. None of the oldest New Testaments that exist have the last 12 verses, which also proves that if their sacred texts had been written a little differently, or if different books would have been canonized, their beliefs would also be a little different. At the Epistle of Barnabas, or the Gospel of Thomas, or any other of the multiple books that men decided would not go into the Bible, would have made it into the Bible, the beliefs of Christians would be different today. And of course, that goes for all other religions as well. Another thing I don't like about the term secular or secular humanism is the fact that if you use them, you're implying that there's an alternative when there's absolutely no proof that there is an alternative. Anything that's outside of the realm of the secular is outside of the realm of existence, which means outside of the realm of reality. There's only one true alternative to the so-called secular, and that's the world of the imagined. So the debate is truly not between the secular and the divine, but between the secular and the imagined. The world of the divine is the world of the imagined. It has no more validity than any other belief conceived through the power of imagination. Just because the overwhelming majority of humans around the world believe it does, in one way or another, doesn't make it so. It has no more validity than Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, leprechauns, unicorns, or a million other things created through the power of imagination. So if we're going to use a term like secular humanism, we need to make up a term for its only alternative. Maybe something like imaginative humanism, or make-believe humanism, or fantasy-based humanism, etc. Any such term would work as long as it's understood that both sides are humanists. The only difference being that one side, secular humanism, deals with reality as it is, while the other side, theism, deals with reality as they wish it were. Another thing I'd like to point out is the fact that secular humanism is not a religion, regardless of what the Supreme Court has declared. At best, it may be referred to as a philosophy, and even then it's not a whole philosophy, but only a small part of individuals' overall philosophy. But no matter how you slice it, it's simply not a religion. And if you don't believe me, just look up the terms religion, secular, and humanism separately in your dictionary. You'll see that the terms religion and secular are nearly exact opposites. Getting back to why human beings believe in God but put their faith in men, just think about this. If a believer was born in another time or place, the odds would be overwhelming that they would believe in another religion. Would a Christian be a Christian if he was born in America before the arrival of the Europeans? Of course not. Would a Muslim be a Muslim if he was born in Japan but was never exposed to Islam? Of course not. Would a Jew be a Jew if he was born in India before men brought the ideas of Judaism to India? Of course not. Geography is the number one factor determining a human being's religious beliefs, and exposure is the number two factor determining a human being's religious beliefs. And in both those cases, it's the influence of men that determines what a human being is going to believe, not God. Human beings have been speaking for God throughout history. And what they say about God is always influenced and derived by the ideas of those who came before them, no matter what they may add to them. In essence, egotistical human beings created every religion that has ever existed or that will ever exist, not God. In fact, any human being who has the temerity to speak for God is either ignorant, a megalomaniac, power-hungry, or a fool. To speak for God is to speak as God. If you're interested in these ideas and many more, they can be found in my new book, The Common Sense Ethics of a Blue-Collar Philosopher, by S.G. Applebee, available at Publish America and other online bookstores. Thanks for your time.